He keeps the TV on until the credits finish rolling. A little boy sits in the blue glow past midnight, lost in a late-night movie while the rest of the house sleeps. In this ritual, he finds a doorway to other worlds. Worlds of guns, ghosts, and heroes that spark something inside of him. That boy will grow up to invite us into those worlds. He'll blur the lines between game and cinema, between player and participant. His name is Hideo Kojima. We begin with a story of solitude, imagination, and the power of connection, from quiet nights in front of a TV to some of the most ambitious games ever made. Now let's head to your favorite bar, grab a drink, and join me for today's story about the man who created wonders. Hideo Kojima was born in 1963, the youngest of 3 children in a well-to-do Japanese family. As a child in Osaka, he was a latchkey kid, often alone with his imagination. Every evening, his parents had a rule. The family must watch a film together, and little Hideo wasn't allowed to go to bed until the movie ended. Westerns, horror, art films, nothing was off limits. 4-year-old Hideo sat wide-eyed through adult dramas and spaghetti westerns, even the scary scenes, absorbing the language of cinema. By age 10, his parents even sent him to the theater alone with money for a ticket and a brochure, expecting him to come home and discuss the movie's themes with them afterward. It was an unconventional upbringing, but it ignited in Kojima a lifelong love of storytelling and film. He later quipped that 70% of my body is made of movies, a humorous exaggeration that speaks to how deeply those nightly film sessions shaped his identity. But young Hideo wasn't just a passive viewer, he was a dreamer. He spent hours making up stories in his head, sometimes so lost in thought he'd fall into roadside ditches while walking, imagining other worlds. At age 13, tragedy struck. His father passed suddenly, shattering Kojima's world. It was a lonely, difficult time. Yet in that darkness, his resolve to create only grew stronger. In his early teens, to cope and to create, Kojima borrowed a friend's 8mm camera and roped his school friends into making amateur movies. They shot a zombie flick to show at a school festival, a scrappy, homemade horror movie with makeup and ketchup blood. His friends weren't into it as he was, but Hideo convinced them, selling tickets for 50 yen apiece in hopes of making enough money to buy more film. They barely sold a few tickets and certainly didn't turn a profit, but Kojima didn't mind. He had gotten a taste of building worlds and telling stories, and he loved it. As he grew older, Kojima's creative passion turned towards writing. In university, he studied economics by day, but at night, he wrote short stories and pitched novel ideas to magazines. He still harbored a distant dream of making films, yet in Japan of the 1980s, that path felt out of reach. There were no film schools nearby, and the film industry's budgets were tiny. He doubted he'd ever get to direct the kind of epic movies he imagined. Then came a revelation from an unlikely source: a home video game console. In the mid-1980s, a friend showed him Nintendo's family computer, the Famicom. One game in particular, the text adventure Super Mario Bros., and another called the Portopia Serial Murder Case, made Kojima realize that video games could be a new avenue for storytelling. Immediately it struck me. This might be another route into making film-like experiences, he recalled of that moment. The interactivity of games, the idea that a player could live a story, lit up Kojima's mind. In that instant, he pivoted. If he couldn't break into film, he would pour his cinematic dreams into video games. Becoming a game designer, however, was not a celebrated career choice in mid-80s Japan. When Kojima announced his plan to friends and professors, many were incredulous. Some even begged him to reconsider, thinking he was throwing away a secure future. At a friend's wedding around that time, the groom introduced Kojima to the guests with a teasing lament. He's talented and likable, but I'm sorry to say, he's decided to join a video game company. The whole room burst into laughter at Kojima's expense. In Japan then, video games were seen as children's toys, not a serious profession. There wasn't even a proper Japanese word yet for game designer. Kojima was embarrassed enough that at parties, he'd sometimes claim to work in finance rather than admit he made games. But even the ridicule became fuel for him. He wanted to prove that games could be art. In 1986, at 23, Hideo Kojima joined Konami, a respected Japanese game studio. He chose Konami in part because it was the only game company listed on the stock exchange at the time. In his mind, that gave it a stamp of legitimacy he could point to if anyone ever questioned his career. Inside, though, he was a rookie in a suit, a young man with cinematic ambitions, entering a very traditional corporate environment. Kojima soon found he wasn't alone in coming to games from other passions. Many of his new colleagues were dropouts from film, music, or manga, who hadn't found success elsewhere and turned to this young medium of video games to fulfill their creative urges. They bonded in their outsider status and their big dreams. Kojima's early days at Konami were anything but smooth. He was brimming with ideas, but the company's hierarchy was rigid and old school. As the low man on the totem pole, Kojima struggled to get his ideas heard. His very first assignment, a project called Lost World, was cancelled after just 6 months, a devastating blow for the novice designer. He poured his hopes into that project, only to see it killed, leaving him with a reputation as the guy whose first game never even shipped. In a strict Japanese workplace, that was a hard stigma to shake. So when Konami asked him to help design a war game for the MSX2 home computer, Kojima approached it as a make-or-break chance. It was 1986, and run-and-gun military action games were all the rage. The studio heads wanted something to capitalize on the Rambo craze, but Kojima didn't want to make a copycat shooting game. He loved the idea of a military setting, yet he imagined something more tense, more cerebral. What if, instead of mowing down enemies, the player had to avoid them? Around him, people were skeptical. An action game where you don't shoot anything? Where you're weak and outnumbered? It sounded like a recipe for boredom or failure. And on top of the conceptual doubts, Kojima faced a very real technical obstacle: the MSX2 hardware itself. This was an era of strict technical limits. The MSX2 could only display a few moving objects on screen at once. If too many objects lined up, some would simply vanish from the screen. That meant a fast-paced shoot-'em-up with multiple enemies and bullets flying was nearly impossible on this machine. Instead of seeing this as a deal-breaker, Kojima saw it as inspiration. If the hardware couldn't handle big firefights, then the game's design would avoid them. He turned the limitation into a feature. Kojima remembered a favorite movie, The Great Escape, about prisoners of war sneaking out of a Nazi camp and a light bulb went off. Stealth could be the core of his game. You're a soldier alone behind enemy lines, but instead of charging in guns blazing, which the hardware couldn't render anyway, you would sneak past guards, strike from the shadows, and escape without being caught. The result was Metal Gear, released in 1987 on the MSX2 in Japan. It was unlike anything else at the time. Players controlled a Special Forces operative, codenamed Solid Snake, on a mission to infiltrate a fortress and destroy a mysterious superweapon. But if they tried to play it like a typical action game, they'd quickly fail. Snake was no one-man army, and triggering an alert often meant a swift death. The game forced you to be patient, to observe guard patrols, to crawl under cameras, and hide in boxes. It was a combat game about not fighting, as Kojima jokingly described it. Against expectations, Metal Gear's stealth gameplay hooked players, introducing a whole new genre, the stealth action game, born directly from technical constraints and Kojima's cinematic sensibilities. The MSX2's limitations had literally shaped a new way to play, Metal Gear became a moderate hit in Japan, and an NES port brought the name to Western audiences. For Kojima, it was a first vindication. His unorthodox ideas could work, and players were ready for a different kind of action. Over the next few years, Kojima continued to push boundaries with Konami. In 1988, he designed Snatcher, a hard-boiled cyberpunk adventure heavily inspired by Hollywood films like Blade Runner. It was essentially an interactive graphic novel on the MSX2 and PC engine, complete with voice-acted dialogue and a noir detective story set in a future city. Though not a commercial blockbuster, Snatcher earned cult acclaim for its cinematic presentation and mature storytelling. Kojima followed it in 1994 with Police Knots, another filmic adventure. This time, a buddy cop thriller in space, mixing animations and gameplay. That further cemented his reputation as one of the game industry's auteurs. These titles were ambitious, but still relatively niche. Kojima had bigger stories to tell, and he was waiting for technology to catch up to his vision. Finally, in the late 1990s, it did. The advent of CD-ROM and 3D graphics on Sony's PlayStation opened a new frontier. Kojima went back to the world of Metal Gear, armed with polygon graphics and cinematic cutscenes, to create the game that would make him a household name. In 1998, Metal Gear Solid launched on the PlayStation and took the gaming world by storm. Here was a game that felt like a playable action movie, fully voice-acted characters, dynamic camera angles, orchestral music, even long, elaborate codec radio conversations that fleshed out a twisting spy narrative. Kojima's love of film dripped from every frame. The game begins with Solid Snake sneaking into a nuclear disposal facility during a storm, a scene that plays out in dramatic cinematic angles with only minimal player control. It was bold, even risky, yet players loved it. Metal Gear Solid proved that gamers were willing to sit back and watch at times if the story and presentation were compelling enough. The boss fights were legendary, and the stealth gameplay from the 2D days translated brilliantly into 3D. MGS sold over 6 million copies and made Solid Snake and Hideo Kojima internationally recognized names. At the end of the game's credits, Kojima cheekily inserted a voiceover saying produced and directed by Hideo Kojima, planting his auteur signature just like a film director. He had arrived not just as a designer, but as a cinematic storyteller in a new medium. Kojima would spend the next 15 years expanding and redefining what Metal Gear could be. In 2001, Metal Gear Solid 2: Sons of Liberty on the PlayStation 2 pushed his experimental impulses even further. He famously bait and switched players by having Solid Snake, the hero everyone loved, replaced after the prologue by a new protagonist, the rookie operative Raiden, without any prior warning. Fans were shocked, even angry, but Kojima had a point to make. MGS2's story unfolded into a meta-commentary on information control, digital manipulation, and the nature of sequels and heroes. By the end, the game was openly addressing the player about the flood of digital content in modern society, years before terms like fake news or social media existed. What began as a top-notch stealth thriller veered into philosophical science fiction that left players debating for decades. It was both a critical hit and initially a confusing pill for many fans to swallow. In time, though, MGS2 came to be seen as prophetic, a game that predicted the age of ubiquitous online information and AI-driven censorship. This willingness to experiment, even at the cost of baffling his audience, became a Kojima hallmark. Each new MGS game took a different cinematic flavor. Metal Gear Solid 3: Snake Eater 2004 was set in the 1960s Cold War and played like Kojima's love letter to classic James Bond films and survival adventures. The game dropped players in a jungle as Naked Snake and made them hunt for food, treat their wounds, and camouflage themselves with face paint and fatigues. It featured an opening credits sequence with a crooning Bond-esque theme song and a stylized montage, an homage to the spy movies Kojima grew up on. And in its final act, MGS3 delivered an emotional gut punch of a story about loyalty and sacrifice that proved games could hit as hard as any film. Fans still talk about the boss's final scene and that long ladder climb accompanied by the game's theme song, moments where Kojima used cinematic timing to leave a lasting mark on players' hearts. By 2008, Metal Gear Solid 4 Guns of the Patriots arrived on the PlayStation 3 as the grand finale of Solid Snake's saga. Here, Kojima's cinematic ambitions reached their peak, or some might say their indulgent extreme. MGS4 featured cutscenes that ran 20, 30, even 70 minutes long in one stretch, essentially becoming a feature-length film woven into the game. It tied up story threads from across the entire series in an operatic, melodramatic fashion. Some critics poked fun at its verbosity, but others praised it as an uncompromising vision. Kojima, unfiltered, delivering a part playable, part watchable epic on his terms. Underneath the extravagance, MGS4 was also a technical showcase, squeezing every drop of power from the PS3 to render war-torn Middle Eastern streets and mechs in detail. It felt like a farewell, not just to Snake, the character, but to a style of heavily story-driven game design that few besides Kojima could pull off and still find massive success with. When MGS4's end credits rolled, after multiple false endings and a final codec call that made players chuckle, it truly seemed like the end of an era. Kojima wasn't quite done with Metal Gear though. He oversaw 2010's Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker on the PlayStation Portable, a title he originally imagined as Metal Gear Solid 5 before re-scoping it. Despite being on a handheld, Peace Walker carried forward big ideas. It introduced a co-op multiplayer take on stealth missions and a base-building system where players could recruit enemy soldiers, mechanics that would later evolve dramatically in his next main game. By the mid-2010s, Kojima and Konami had a final, grand collaboration up their sleeve, one that would also become their breaking point. Metal Gear Solid 5 would be split into two parts, Ground Zeroes, a 2014 prologue, and The Phantom Pain, the full game in 2015. Powered by the new Fox engine that Kojima's team had built, MGS5 offered something radically different, an open-world stealth experience where players had unprecedented freedom in how to approach missions. Kojima's hallmark cinematic cutscenes took a backseat to emerging gameplay. Hours might pass with no cutscenes at all, as you snuck or fought through sand-swept Afghanistan or the jungles of Africa. When the cutscenes did come, they were presented as single, unbroken camera shots, as if a documentary crew were following Snake, a stylistic choice that subtly reinforced the game's themes of player agency and voyeurism. Critics and players alike marveled at the gameplay. MGS5's refined mechanics and open-world systems set a new bar for the stealth genre. Yet many also felt that something was incomplete. The story of the Phantom Pain, while thematically rich, touching on revenge, identity, and the cycle of violence, ended abruptly, with major plot threads unresolved and a final chapter seemingly missing. Behind the scenes, a storm was brewing. Kojima's relationship with Konami had deteriorated severely during MGS5's long development. The exact reasons may never be public. Reports spoke of budget disagreements and clashing visions, but the fallout was very visible. In March 2015, observant fans noticed that Konami was quietly removing Kojima's name from marketing materials and even the cover art of Metal Gear Solid 5, a shocking break from the Hideo Kojima game branding of past titles. That year, Konami underwent a corporate restructuring, and Kojima Productions as a studio within Konami was reportedly disbanded. The auteur, who had been synonymous with Konami's biggest franchise, was being stripped of his role, even as he worked to finish that franchise's magnum opus. In September 2015, The Phantom Pain shipped to critical acclaim and strong sales, but Kojima's name was conspicuously absent from the box, and those narrative holes left many suspecting that the game had been forced out the door before Kojima could fully realize his vision. Tension hung in the air publicly, It became undeniable when December rolled around and Metal Gear Solid 5 won an award at the Game Awards in Los Angeles, but Kojima was nowhere to be seen. The show's host, Jeff Keighley, somberly explained on live broadcast that Mr. Kojima had every intention of being here, but was informed by a lawyer representing Konami that he would not be allowed to travel to the ceremony. The audience erupted in boos at the mention of Konami's legal block. It was an unprecedented moment of industry drama made public. A beloved creator effectively barred by his employer from accepting an award for his own work. As Keighley spoke directly to the camera,
Hideo is in Tokyo right now watching the show, so we want you to know, Hideo, that we're thinking of you.
It was clear that a very bitter divorce was underway. Amid the turmoil of Metal Gear's endgame, another Kojima project had captured gamers' imaginations, only to be abruptly killed. In August 2014, a mysterious free demo called PT appeared on the PlayStation Store from a fictional 7780s studio. Players worldwide dove into this photorealistic, looping, haunted house hallway, solving obtuse puzzles and recoiling in terror at each ghostly encounter. PT was an ingenious piece of interactive horror, and when the first players finally beat it, a teaser revealed the truth. PT stood for Playable Teaser, and it was a secret announcement for Silent Hills, a new installment in Konami's famed horror series, to be co-directed by Hideo Kojima and Hollywood filmmaker Guillermo del Toro, starring actor Norman Reedus as the protagonist. The gaming community went wild. Kojima, the master of stealth action, tackling psychological horror with Del Toro's creature-loving imagination. It seemed like a match made in heaven, or perhaps hell, in a good way. Over the next few months, Kojima spoke excitedly in interviews about how Silent Hills would reinvent horror, and fans dissected every cryptic clue in PT looking for hints. But as Kojima's bond with Konami frayed, Silent Hills became collateral damage. In April 2015, Konami suddenly announced that Silent Hills was cancelled and that PT would be pulled from the PlayStation Store, effectively erasing its existence. Guillermo del Toro and Norman Reedus both publicly expressed their disappointment as rumors swirled of Kojima's impending exit from the company. Konami issued a terse statement. While they would continue the Silent Hill franchise in some form, the embryonic collaboration with Kojima and del Toro would not be continued. The outcry from fans was enormous. PT had made such an impact that even after its removal, people kept it installed on their consoles as a cherished relic, and PS4s with PT on them went up for sale on eBay at ridiculous prices. To this day, PT is considered one of the greatest horror game experiences ever, despite being only a short demo. Its demise became synonymous with what many saw as Konami's mistreatment of Kojima's creative vision. That mistreatment seemed to reach a climax at the end of 2015. After the Phantom Pain shipped, Konami and Kojima officially parted ways. The exact timing and terms weren't made public at first. Konami rather vaguely insisted Kojima was merely on vacation when reports of his departure surfaced in October. But on December 16, 2015, the news became official. Hideo Kojima had left Konami after nearly 30 years, and the Kojima production studio within Konami was shut down. For months, Konami had downplayed the situation, but now it was clear to everyone that one of gaming's longest-running partnerships had collapsed. Konami's management was pivoting the company toward mobile games and its profitable pachinko business, de-emphasizing big-budget console titles, and Kojima's lavish cinematic epics no longer fit their strategy. It was a bitter end, marked by snubs like the Game Awards incident, and Kojima's name being scrubbed off his own creations. Imagine investing your entire soul into building a series over decades, only to have your name removed from the box at the finish line. That was what happened to Kojima. As 2015 closed, many wondered if he would ever get the chance or have the heart to make games on the scale of Metal Gear again. Kojima, however, was not about to disappear into the shadows. Within days of his Konami exit, he staged a comeback that felt straight out of a feel-good movie. On December 16th, 2015, the very day his non-compete contract expired, Kojima announced the re-establishment of Kojima Productions as an independent studio, and he revealed a new partnership with Sony Interactive Entertainment to publish his next game on PS. Andrew House, president of PlayStation, appeared beside Kojima in a video, warmly welcoming him back to the industry and into Sony's family. The press release made it clear Kojima's new studio would develop its first game exclusively for the PS4 with Sony's full support. After the turmoil with Konami, here was a lifeline, an alliance with a platform holder that valued Kojima's talent and certainly relished the idea of landing his next big game as a PlayStation exclusive. Kojima sounded optimistic and liberated. "I'm embarking on a new challenge," he said. It was a new beginning, and it happened remarkably fast. A testament to Kojima's reputation that within a blink he had the backing of a global giant to start creating again. Just 6 months later, at E3 2016 in Los Angeles, Hideo Kojima walked onto a stage to a thunderous standing ovation. Halfway through Sony's live press conference, the lights went low and an audible ripple went through the crowd as a silhouette appeared. He stepped into a single spotlight, visibly moved by the reception. "Hello everyone," he said with a little smile. The audience roared. It was a powerful moment. Here was Kojima, who a year earlier had been muzzled and absent, now triumphantly returning in front of the whole world. With his newfound freedom, Kojima threw himself completely into Death Stranding. Over roughly 3 years of development, he built a team where many former Kojima production staff joined him anew, and, in a move that spoke to his industry friendships, he partnered with another renowned studio for technology. Guerrilla Games in Amsterdam loaned Kojima their cutting-edge Decima engine, the tech behind Horizon Zero Dawn, to serve as the backbone for Death Stranding's vast world. The Decima engine enabled incredibly realistic landscapes and character models, which Kojima populated with some of his wildest ideas to date. When Death Stranding released on November 8, 2019 for PlayStation 4, it was met with a mixture of admiration, befuddlement, and deep emotion. Here was a game where the primary goal was not to kill, or even to stealthily avoid killing, but to connect. Set in a post-apocalyptic America shattered by a cataclysm, the game stars Sam Porter Bridges, Norman Reedus, a courier tasked with delivering packages between isolated cities and researchers. The world is plagued by invisible ghostly beings and rain that accelerates aging, but Sam's most lethal enemy is often the landscape itself. Mountains, rivers, endless plains of rocks, all traversed on foot. Kojima boldly made the act of walking his core gameplay mechanic. Players had to worry about balance, weight, and endurance as they hiked across an eerily quiet, stunning, rendered wasteland. Many called it a walking simulator in those early days of discussion, some derisively, but Kojima had a purpose. As Sam delivers critical supplies, he also brings isolated people onto a chiral network, essentially reconnecting the country one step at a time. And through the game's online features, players could indirectly help each other. A bridge you build in your game might appear in another player's world. The ladder someone left behind might save you from a deadly fall. Kojima called this the social Strand System, a new form of online play not about competition or direct co-op, but asynchronous cooperation and empathy. In one interview, he explained that while most action games give you guns to unite against the common foe, with Death Stranding, he wanted to go a little deeper, to give players a tool to unite through helping each other, not fighting each other. The term strand itself, as used in the game, meant both a rope and a bond. It was as if Kojima took the theme of connection between individuals, between life and death, between the player and the game world, and wove it through every strand of the experience. Death Stranding was risky and unconventional, especially as a major release. Some players admittedly bounced off its deliberate, meditative gameplay in the first few hours, but those who stuck with it often found themselves surprisingly moved. There is a unique, quiet brilliance in the game's loops. You plan a route, load your gear, embark into the wild utterly alone, and over time, you start encountering traces of others. A climbing anchor left on a cliff, a reassuring sign, keep going, you can do it, placed by someone at a tough incline. A shelter built cooperatively by dozens of players contributing materials, offering Sam a safe haven from the time rain. These moments aren't scripted, they emerge from the social Strand System connecting everyone. And they create a sense of a shared struggle and hope that's unlike the adrenaline or tension most games deliver. By the end of Death Stranding's story, a characteristically mind-bending Kojima saga involving extinction entities, personal sacrifice, and a baby in an artificial womb named Bibi, many players found themselves in tears, hit by an emotional payload about learning to reconnect with others and not lose hope in humanity. It was as earnest a message as Kojima had ever conveyed, wrapped in layers of symbolism and mystery, but heartfelt at its core. Death Stranding was successful enough to prove that Kojima could flourish outside Konami. It won numerous awards, including several Game Awards in 2019, and by July 2021, Kojima Productions announced that over 5 million copies have been sold worldwide, a strong number for a new IP that was as experimental as this. The game's unique concepts got people talking far beyond release. In fact, in a world shaken by the COVID-19 pandemic shortly after the game's launch, many noted how oddly prescient Death Stranding was. Its depiction of people living in isolation, communicating largely through holograms and deliveries, felt familiar in the era of lockdowns and Amazon drop-offs. Kojima mused that he hadn't predicted the pandemic, but it gave new context to his work, and it pushed him to think about how a sequel might address the changed world. In September 2021, Kojima Productions released Death Stranding Director's Cut for the PlayStation 5, an expanded and enhanced edition of the original game. The term Director's Cut was something Kojima himself wryly noted wasn't quite accurate. It's not that content had been cut from the original that he was now restoring. Rather, this new edition was an opportunity to add features and missions that the team dreamed up post-launch. The Director's Cut added new tools like a cargo catapult and a stabilizer to make traversal even more interesting. New story missions set in mysterious facilities that felt like Metal Gear-style infiltration callbacks, and even a racetrack for vehicle time trials, a lighthearted extra for players to enjoy. It also integrated some crossover content that had been in the PC version, like missions themed after Half-Life. All of it was woven into the game so that it unlocked naturally as you progressed, giving even veterans reasons to connect, pun intended, with Sam's journey. The Director's Cut was the definitive experience, fully leveraging the PlayStation's power for better graphics and load times. It launched on September 24th, 2021, and later made its way to PC as well. For Kojima, the continuous improvement of Death Stranding was a sign of his commitment to that world and community of players. He often retweeted players' photography screenshots of the game's landscapes and responded to those who shared how the game had affected them emotionally. It was clear that Death Stranding, perhaps more than any project since his Metal Gear debut, came straight from Kojima's heart. Fittingly then, Kojima wasn't done with this new universe. In December 2022, standing once again on the Game Awards stage with his friend Jeff Keighley, Kojima unveiled Death Stranding 2 with a haunting teaser trailer. By early 2025, development had reached its climax. In March 2025, Kojima Productions hosted a panel at the SXSW Festival in Texas, where Kojima, Norman Reedus, and others shared new footage and finally announced a release date. Death Stranding 2 On the Beach would ship on June 26, 2025 for PlayStation 5. The crowd erupted in cheers at the news. Pre-orders went live, and Kojima released a new trailer teasing the game's premise, set several years after the original. DS2 would delve into the mysteries of the beach and explore the Drawbridge Project, an organization hinted to be building literal bridges across the oceans to connect continents. It was grand, weird, and epic. In other words, classic Kojima. When June 2025 arrived, Death Stranding 2 On the Beach launched and was met with massive curiosity. Without spoiling anything, it's enough to say Kojima doubled down on the Strand concept while introducing new gameplay mechanics. Once again, players around the world found themselves bonded by shared strife and shared hope in Kojima's sandbox. And fittingly, just like Metal Gear had once done in a very different way, Death Stranding 2 proved that Kojima could create a franchise from scratch that resonated globally. In the end, Hideo Kojima's legacy is connection, not in a slogan, but in the way his games ask us to reach out. Metal Gear taught us that information shapes people, that stealth can be a language. Death Stranding turned that idea into action, letting strangers quietly help each other and feel less alone. His legacy is also authorship. He treated games like cinema without apology, using framing, editing, and long scenes to carry weight. Sometimes it was too much, sometimes it was perfect, but it was always his voice. He made room in a risk-averse industry for strong points of view. He bridged worlds. Actors, directors, musicians, and studios crossed into his games because he invited them and knew what to do with them. Marketing was not a brochure, it was the first chapter. He turned limits into ideas. Old hardware made stealth, a new engine made Strands. When doors closed, he built another studio and kept going. Most of all, he kept faith with players. He trusted us to sit with long conversations, to walk through hard weather, to find meaning in small acts of help. That trust shaped a generation of designers and widened what games can be. His body of work says a simple thing: we play better when we play together, and we are still learning from that. Thank you for spending your time with me today. If you're still here, I'm grateful, truly. Different stories, different opinions, same respect. If this story gave you a good time, a like helps more than you think, and you're always welcome to subscribe and stay for the next one. Take care of yourself, stretch, drink some water, rest your eyes. Until the next Stranding.